Annapurna Blues, Chapter 1, Fall 1977, A Brave New World. The monk had gathered his wool robe up to his knees so he could run faster down the boulder-strewn hillside. There were no trees on this slope, just boulders, packed earth, and overgrazed stubble. He made good time in his old worn shoes and felt his sleeve pocket from time to time to make sure his cargo was still there. Wrapped carefully in a sheet of locally made paper, he carried a kata, a white silk scarf with the blessings of the chief lama. He carried it down to his fellow monk, Dawa, the tanka painter, to give to Jerry on the occasion of his departure from the village. It was early in the morning, and the monk was acting with earnest effort to be at Dawa's before Jerry. The painter's house was in sight, and the monk continued running. Alone in his soon-to-be-vacated room, he stared at the damn letter, wadded it up, flattened it out, reread it, cried over it, spit when he finished it. His belly cramped when he read it. He tried to surrender, but couldn't help feeling it was all out of control. He was taken hostage in his own world and didn't want to have anything to do with it. He wanted to negate its message, hide the sound it made in his brain, and have things turn out differently. He pounded his fist on the table in his room. Jerry wanted to hurt himself. He was confused. He chain-smoked a pack of cigarettes since the night before and kept reading and rereading Lisa's letter. Jerry pressed his rough hands together in front of his heart and blinked away a tear. Dawa put a white scarf around Jerry's neck, and they bowed to each other. The silk kata was the blessing, in this case a sincere goodbye. Namaste. Namaste, Dawa. Jerry held his kata with one hand and waved with the other as he walked up the footpath away from the village. He had to decide, bus or plane. He could either hike for 3 days to the road headed Jerry and then take the full-day bus to Kathmandu, or he could walk a few hours to Paplu and wait for a clear day when the plane could land. Trying to catch the 6-passenger Platus might mean a week of waiting, plus frustration with the weather. Well, the last time he waited, he drank Dr. Pemba's apricot home brew for 3 days and almost missed the plane. Jerry chose the guaranteed hard trek and bumpy full-day bus ride to Kathmandu. Jerry was leaving his adoptive home of the past 2 years under a cloud. He needed to walk and work it out. He needed to walk his blues away and get tired till it made him numb. He didn't need to sit and wait for the plane and add to his frustration. It might lift his mood if he pushed his physical limits. It was worth a try. The village homes were made of rock, each stone carried and shaped by human hands and stacked into careful walls. The farmers' fields were small terraces clinging to collections of topsoil and vegetation. Life in the isolation of the mountains made the villagers physically tough and emotionally open. Friendships were strong. Jerry's neighbor and friend, Dawa, was a monk who painted traditional Buddhist tankas as a meditative practice. Jerry often spent his mornings drinking sucha, salty butter tea, at Dawa's house, asking questions and trying to stay warm next to Dawa's fire. The language barrier was real, and when the conversation got too confusing, they shifted focus to the sucha, and Dawa would refill their cups. Jerry's blue eyes welled up beyond the sight of the village. His lanky frame was strong from living at high altitude and walking everywhere. The sun had burned his nose and bleached his red hair. The smell of the village cooking fires was lost as he entered the pine forest a few minutes outside the village. He'd left Dawa a gift of 20 kilos of rice. His small library went to the school. He gave his collection of household items to his helper Rinji. But the water system he designed and built was his main gift to the village. It was his Peace Corps project. Jerry took more with him than he left behind. He had learned acceptance and meditated on the Buddhist teachings from the stories in Dawa's paintings. There was no exact translation, but Dawa's approach and dedication to his work were lessons by example. At the center of Dawa's newest painting, The Wheel of Life, more correctly the Wheel of Diluted Existence, there's a boar, a rooster, and a snake. They are ignorance, greed, and aggression, chasing each other's tail, feeding on each other. Purifying symbols emanate from the center at the same time. Hum. Multiple stories occur simultaneously. Jerry could understand only part of it. Compounding Jerry's physical dislocation, his move away from his host village, was Lisa's letter. He sat in stunned silence after reading it for the first time. It cut his anchor and set him adrift. She told him how she couldn't bring herself to write it, and how she knew it was far too long before composing her letter. He still had a month to finish his service in Nepal. A new reality settled in, and things became increasingly dark. He walked quickly past Trashindo Monastery and over the pass through the forest. The summit cairn stones marked the top of the rocky ridge between the turquoise Dudkosi and Solukola rivers. The summit cairn was a pile of stones festooned with dozens of sun-bleached prayer flags, tattered by the wind. The trail dropped steeply through the pine and rhododendron forest and crossed the churning Solukola at Ringmo. He climbed the steep trail to the top of the next ridge past the yak cheese factory, passing only a few people on the trail. He stopped at a tea house along the way and sat alone on a plank bench outside to drink a cup of sweet dud chia and smoke a cigarette. On the skyline, he could see Mount Everest, Sagamartha, or in the Sherpa language, Chomolungma, Mother Goddess of the Earth. He didn't know if he would ever see it again, and didn't waste time on such thoughts. Jerry kept up a brisk pace, using a ski pole as a walking stick. By early afternoon, normally a full day's trek, he arrived at the whitewashed Sherpa village of Junbasi. In the center of the peaceful settlement was a Buddhist stupa. It had a white dome and was next to a water-powered prayer wheel. It was a refuge, peaceful and unhurried. He needed to push his body in order to slow his mind and dull his pain. He hoped if he exhausted himself, somehow his suffering would be less. He decided to push on after getting something to eat. At a house in Junbasi, Jerry sat on a wooden stool by the dirty cloth hanging at the kitchen door and ate boiled potatoes with lima beans. He dipped them into a hot sauce and licked his finger. The earthy flavor of the beans was a poor man's meat. He asked for more. Jerry cleaned his plate and pronounced the meal over with a hearty belch. As he left the village, Jerry tagged into a line of porters bound for Jerry. Climbing over Lama Yura La, a 10,000-foot pass, at a slow, measured pace, they shifted the weight of their loads methodically from one leg to the other. When they stopped, they would take the weight off their loads by resting the doka on their T-shaped walking sticks. He stayed with the small group. The companionship was worth the struggle to keep up. They were slow, but he'd finished a big meal and was slower yet. Jerry's threshold for pain was high, but the ache in his heart was strong. He welcomed feeling numb when a cloud of freezing fog enveloped the trail and it hailed. The instant storm was violent and intense. It forced him to hide in the exposed roots of a trailside tree with two of the porters from the group. They huddled together and held a towel over their heads. The large hailstones hailstones stung Jerry's ears and shoulders. The storm passed quickly, and when it stopped, the air was cold and the ground was covered with ice. He started, and after 3 steps, Jerry slipped and fell flat on his face. He got a few scratches and a bloody nose. He started walking and fell down again, now a mouthful of hailstones and dust. Unnerved and clumsy, he kept walking with the porters until sunset. It was almost too dark to see the trail when they stopped in Sete, near a cardamom plantation. They found accommodation at a house in the village. The house was full of smoke from a cooking fire and thought it was especially bad because the wind was blowing hard. There were benches against the walls, one for each traveler. There was a little water here and no shower, and the room smelled of smoke and sweat. He ate a plate of dalbat with his fingers, washed his hands, and wanted to sleep. Low, wide wooden benches served as beds. He peeled his stiff socks off and picked at the blistered toes. Jerry slept in his sleeping bag on a thin foam pad. He listened to the bad hack of the grandfather. It continued all night. His body hurt enough for him to begin to forget his lovesickness. The coughing grandfather of the house asked him if he was a Eklai alone. And when he understood his affirmative response, he shook his head to say he was sorry. In Nepal, there is nothing worse than being alone. Everyone identifies with their family, clan, religious affiliation, village, or district. No one wants to be Eklai. In the morning, Jerry set off along the trail, limping, and found a walking stick to use in the hand opposite from his ski pole. It took some weight off his blistered foot. 2 or more days of walking were ahead of him, and his progress had slowed. He pushed too hard. He trudged on hour after hour. The pain from the blisters helped him to forget.